Hey guys, John here. So the biggest question I always get when I do these courses is where can I get access to the source code? So I obviously can't upload that here on YouTube, so I've made that available for you over on BitTorrent. And along with the source code, you'll also be able to actually download the videos to your computer so you can have them forever. So if for some reason something crazy happened and I decided to delete them, or YouTube kicked me off of their site or whatever, it wouldn't really matter for you because you would have all the source code, you'd have all the videos, everything essentially that I've created for the course you would have on your own computer. So I've created a link in the description where you can find that stuff over on BitTorrent. Please consider going over there, supporting me that way. I'd appreciate that. Also, please consider making a donation here on YouTube using the fan funding. This is how, or one of the ways that I'm able to keep all of the videos that I'm doing and releasing here on YouTube for free, by those who are able to pitching in and allowing me to do that. So please consider that. And if you need access to any of the resources that I use through everything that I do online, coding, releasing videos, etc., you can head on over to johnmorrisonline.com/resources, and I have a whole slew of all sorts of different resources, from hosting to different tutorials and just everything over there that I use. So again, johnmorrisonline.com/resources. All right, on to the lesson. Hey, John Morris here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to abstract out your database functions or your database methods, and we're going to do that by creating a class. Now, you may be familiar with creating classes, and I want to say up front that obviously I'm going to give you access to this code, but this is really meant for training purposes. And I say that because there are all kinds of database classes out there that do similar or exact same thing that this class would do, but they do it better. They're used by more people, so they're been tested more. There's people that are a community of developers that are constantly upgrading it. So as a developer, those are things that you have to think about and pick the right project to get involved with or to use based on if it's going to be constantly updated and so on and so forth. For me, I just want to show this to you as a training so you can have an idea and understanding of how to do this. Not only that, but when you use one of those other frameworks, I'm going to show you one in the next video that I recommend you use. But when you use those, you can actually do what I'm doing here on top of those in order to make your queries a little bit easier. In fact, that's what WordPress does. Is they took Easy SQL, which is the one we're going to talk about, and they adapted it for what they needed. Now, again, if you want to write your own, if you want to use this as a basis or whatever, and then write your own going forward, that's fine. Just know that this was written up in less than an hour or so, and it really isn't used anywhere, and you're just kind of on your own if you're going to use it. But that said, it does work, and we'll walk through more importantly what I want you to get is the overall big picture of how to abstract out your database class so that you can make your queries easier instead of always constantly having to rewrite the same code over and over. All right, so let's just get familiar here. The first thing that we do is we require our config file. So that's, again, with abstractions, it's simple, but that's one of the easiest things that you can do is actually create a config file and put your database details into that, so that when you install this on multiple sites, really to get up and connected to your database, all you have to do is change the config file. All right, so we'll come over here to our config file. You can see these are actually the exact same values that we were using before with our database details. We're now just defining them as constants in a config file. Right, so our user, our password, our database name, our host, and this one encoding. Again, that may be something that you want to use down the line. I just threw it in there. We don't actually use it in this example. All right, so we require that so we have access to those constants, and we create our class called DB. Obviously, if you're going to use this, you would want to probably rename that so that you don't, there's a pretty good likelihood that that's going to conflict with something else out there. So you probably want to rename that. But the first method inside of this class is our connect method. And in that, essentially all we're doing is instantiating our MySQL object. Okay, so we're just connecting to that, and we're going to return it, right? And you're going to notice down here at the top of all of these, we're going to call that method here in order to use it. Now, you might wonder, I've had this idea before, and so you might have had this idea, might look at this and go, well, why not just instantiate that in a construct method and save it as a property within the class? You could do that. The only problem with that is, depending on how you use your class, whenever you instantiate that class, then it's going to run the constructor, and it's going to instantiate a new instance of that MySQL. And if you're including this, let's say, like oftentimes is done, you're including it in all of your pages in places where you aren't necessarily even running database queries, then you're instantiating the database class when you don't really need it. Okay, so just to avoid that, you can actually use a connect method like this. Now, again, for your application, you may say, well, I don't have any pages where I don't connect to the database, so I'll always need that. So in that case, then you could put it in a constructor. However you want to do that, but for this case, we're going to put it into a connect method. That way now, the only time this gets called is if we're explicitly calling one of the methods inside this class, and that's when we know we're connecting to the database. Okay? All right, so that's our connect method. Again, we're passing in our constants that we created in our config file in order to connect to MySQL. All right? Our next method in here is a query method, and this is really just a generic method. You can run any query on it. You'll notice it takes a parameter of query, and it passes that through to the MySQL query method. So you can actually, this is just for running generic queries. So we're going to go through specific queries below this, but this gives you the option to run any generic queries that you might want to, and it saves you a little bit of code in terms of having to connect, having to loop through the results and return those results, and having to do all that. You can kind of just take a snapshot of that inside of this function, and then when you want to run queries, you can just run generic queries and just put in your SQL statement here. Okay, so that's the first one. We've pretty much covered all of this code already. This is the exact same code. In fact, I copied it over and just changed it a little bit from what we've been using. So this is the exact same code that we've been using with MySQL throughout. All right, next we have our insert method. Now, there's one thing I want to talk about kind of before we dive into this. First, we have our insert method. We're going to have our update method. We're going to have get results, get row, and delete. Now, you'll notice that insert and update are pretty big, and then you notice that get results and get row are pretty small, and they actually just reference our query method that we just talked about. The only difference between these two is this just returns what we get from query straight away. This one actually, because it's get row, it's just getting one result, so it's actually just getting the first result out off of get results, basically, or off of our query. Right, so the reason that I bring that up is because you might wonder, after we go through insert update, why we're doing all of that there, and then for get results and get row, we're not doing any of that. It's really on you when you write the query if you want to do a prepared statement. it's really on you to do that. The reason that is because when it comes to select statements, which is what you're going to be using with get results and get row, there's so many variables that could go into that query. It's very difficult to, if not impossible, to write a method that can account for all of the different scenarios. So, for example, when you do a select statement, you can do select all fields. You can name the fields that you want to use. Now that, again, at first blush, you're like, oh, well, that's easy to account for. But you take that into consideration. Obviously, the table you need to account for, but then you can do, you can order by, you can limit, you can use where clauses, you can get into using joins and all kinds of different things in order to do select statements. It becomes very difficult to account for all of those. So you'll notice not only in this, but if you, for example, look at EasySQL, if you look at the WordPress database, they actually provide methods for insert and update, but when it comes to select methods, they really just have a generic method that they use where you have to actually build out the whole query yourself. That's why they do that. That's why we're doing it here. When it comes to insert and update, those are actually pretty strict because you have to format the SQL statement. For example, for insert, you have to format that very specifically. Okay, so you can't just it has to be insert into the table, the field names, and then the values. There's really no other way to do it. You have to do it that way. So because this is so strict and we know what we have to account for, we can create a method to do that and make it easy to use. Same with update. Now it's a little bit more because you have a where clause. So you update this table, set the fields and values, and then you have the where clause, but still, this is pretty strict. This is, in order to update data, this is what you need to do. So again, when we have that strict SQL statement that we're working toward, we can then create a method to support that. But with all of the options that are available through select queries, it would be pretty difficult, and you'd end up just limiting yourself and giving yourself a headache trying to write all kinds of different or try to write a method that supports everything that you could do with a select statement. What you're better off doing is creating this generic get results, get row methods, and then in your application at higher levels, when you want to query something specifically, you write methods for specific select queries so that later on in your application, when you actually want to make those queries, you don't have to rewrite all of the SQL and do all of the stuff that you would normally do here, or that you would want to do here in one of these methods. You actually do it in a layer up in those methods. Okay, so again, that gets really heavy into abstracting applications, but you're better off doing that way so that your select statements that you create can be specific. And you can still save yourself from having to write all that code. For a specific, for example, if you want to retrieve posts, you have a certain number of ways that you want to do that, and you can account for that in higher level functions. Okay, you could do it here, but then as your application grows and you want to do different queries, you'd be constantly changing this. Whereas if you do it at a layer above, you can actually just create new methods or maybe add a parameter to those methods. It's a little bit easier. All right, so there's enough on that. Let's go ahead and dive into our actual insert here. So we're doing this using prepared statements. Okay, so it's actually what makes this a little bit longer. It'd probably be a little bit shorter if we weren't using prepared statements. So the way this works is our insert method takes the table name, it takes in the data, which is an array of data. So it's going to be field names with their values. And then it takes a format array, which specifies the format that we use when we're binding the parameters. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this actually where we're using it. Right, so this is the insert that we're using here. This is our table objects. This is our data array right here. And you can see that it's the post title. So this is our column name in our database, and this is the value that we want to insert. This is another one that we want to, another column that we want to insert data into, and this is the value that we want to insert. Okay, so that's our data array. And here, this is our formatting. So both of these are strings. Of course, if these were an integer, you would do maybe D like that. Whatever the format for that is. In this case, these are both strings. So we specify that format so that when we bind the values, the bind parameter needs to know that, the bind param function needs to know what that format is. All right, so that's what it actually looks like. If we go back up, again, the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to check to see if the table or the data is empty. If either one of those hasn't been specified, there's really nothing we can do, so we just return false. Next, we connect to the database. So we already kind of covered that, so we're just calling that method to get a instance of our MySQL object that we can now use throughout this method. Here we're casting both data and format to arrays. So if someone or if you or whatever were to pass the data or format in as a string, we're just going to go ahead and cast it to an array and try and use it. Chances are if you wrote it as a string, it's probably not going to work later on, but we're just going to cast it to an array and try and use it, as opposed to, if it's not an array, returning it or throwing an error. We're going to just cast it to array and try and use it. You can make a decision on how you want to handle that kind of situation with yours, but that's just what I decided to do here. All right, next we're going to build our format array. Well, we're going to build our format string is really what that should say. And so what that is we're going to take our format array. Remember, it was this array down here where we have our formats for our two different fields. We're going to take that and we're going to implode it. So we're going to create a string out of it, and those, if you remember from bind param, when we specify the format for the bind param method, the format values are all just right next to each other. So when we implode it, we're not putting a space or comma or anything like that. And then of course we are imploding the format array that was passed. Next, we're doing a string replace to get rid of the %. And so what we're left with, if we go to echo format, and I'm going to come down here and actually comment this out so we're not creating a bunch of records we don't need. If we come over here, if you look at format, what we end up with is this SS. This one is actually from later on down at the bottom where we're print-ring the return of the insert method. But so you can see we have our SS, that is our format. All right. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to we need to format our fields, some placeholders, and our values to be able to be put into this this query here. Okay, so list, essentially what the list construct does, it's a language construct. What it does is it will take an array and it will create variables from that array. So if you have an array, in this case what we get returned here is an array of 3 elements. Well, this takes those 3 elements and stores them respectively. The first one in fields, in the fields variable, second one in the placeholders variable, and the third one in the values variable. So when you do a list, you list the variables you want it stored into first here in parentheses, then equal this to your array that you want that to be built from. Well, in this case, we're calling a method. and we're passing in our data array. So essentially inside this method, what we're doing is we're taking our data array and we're creating these three variables that we need to be used later on. You can see we use fields here, placeholders here, and values here. Okay, so we need those variables. Well, we're using this prep query method to do that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Again, we're passing in our data array, which was our fields and their values. So if we come down here to prep query, again, it accepts data and an optional parameter of type, because when we go to update, we actually have to change this a little bit. All right, so inside here, all we're doing is we're first instantiating instances of all these. We do this basically because if you don't do this and you just start off a for each loop, and you notice I'm concatenating the string here and here as well, this will actually throw a PHP notice. So this is saying that in the first iteration of this, that this variable doesn't actually exist yet, so it can't actually concatenate it. It'll still work, but it'll throw a notice. So this is really just to get rid of any notices coming up. So that's what that's for. So that's why we do that. Next, we're going to loop through our data array, and we're going to parse them out as field and value. So again, down here, this is our data array. Right here, this would be a field, and this would be a value in here. And then of course this would be another field, and this would be another value. All right, so that's what we're looping through. And for the fields, then what we're doing is we're essentially creating a comma separated string of those fields. Now, yes, you could use I believe it's I always get them confused, explode and implode, but you could use one of those to actually create this string. But since we need to loop through, we might as well just create it here. So that's why I create it here instead of using implode explode, because we already need to loop through for this other stuff. Okay, so that's essentially all we're doing is creating a comma separated string of the field names, because that's what we need in order to, if we go back up to insert, that's what we need here for this fields right here. So we need a comma separated string of the field names. Okay, so that's what we're creating here. For values, we just essentially need our values stored in an array. And so that's what we're doing here. We're just creating an array of our indexed array of our values. Again, we could use array keys there or array values there, but we're already looping through, so we might as well just do it here. Now here, we have an if-else statement. This is what I'm talking about for, this changes a little bit based off whether you're inserting data or updating data. So in this case, we're inserting, so the type is insert. So this if would not apply. So instead of using this, we'd actually be using this here. And what this is creating our placeholders for our values section in our query string. Okay, so all it's really doing is creating a comma separated list of question marks as placeholders, right? And I'll show you what the query looks like here in just a second. It should help make a little bit more sense. All right, so once we've done that, then we're going to normalize these fields. Basically, for the fields, when we do this up here, we end up with a string that has a comma at the end of it, so we just want to get rid of that comma, so we do a substring to get rid of it, and that's actually the exact same thing for the placeholders. When we create the placeholders here, it's going to have a comma at the end of the entire string, and we want to get rid of that. All right, and then what we're doing here is returning an array that contains the fields, the placeholders, and the values. So this actually is going to return an indexed array. And that is what, when we come up here to our list, that is what gets returned here. So that's an indexed array, and that's why when we use the list language construct, fields, placeholders, and values will now take on those variables. Okay, so the next thing that we're doing after that is we're doing an array unshift. Essentially what that does is it takes, you have a base array here, and it takes a second variable and it prepends it to this. And that's what we need, because for bind parameter, when you specify, when you use it, you specify the format first, the format string first, and then you specify your actual values that you want bound to those placeholders. Okay, so we need to prepend our format that we created up here as a string to our values array so that we can use it later. All right, so the next thing we're actually passing all of this information into our query. So insert into our table, here's our fields, and here's our values, but here we're using our placeholders, and then down here we're going to bind the values. So we're passing this into the MySQL prepare method. So I said I would show you what this query actually looks like once we're all done with all of this. We'll go ahead and we'll just echo that query so you can take a look at it. And if we refresh here, you can see we have insert into, objects, post title, post content, values, and here's our placeholders. Okay, so that's what the query actually looks like. If you go back, remember from past videos, that was the kind of query that we were creating. Now we're just doing it dynamically. And so we had to kind of go through all that in order to do that and be able to account for all the different situations that might come up. All right, so that's what the query actually looks like. Now we're going to bind values to it. So this is where it gets a little tricky. If you've messed with this before, you may have tried to use just what we did in our other videos, which was using the statement, actually just calling the method directly. When you have a situation where you don't know the number of variables, because again, for this, when we call this in our data array, we could call all of or we could post data to all of these fields, or we could use some of them. You don't know how many fields are actually going to be used here. Okay, so when that's the case, you can't bind the values directly, because when you do that, when you bind them directly, it assumes that you know how many values you're binding. And in this case, we don't actually know how many values we're binding. It could be 1, it could be as many as 5, based on our database structure, and whatever your database structure, it could be more. Okay, so we need something that will work no matter what. So what we do here is we call user func array. We use that method. Essentially what that's going to do is it's going to loop through our array. That's not the best way of putting it, but it's going to go ahead and create the variables that we needed based off of our array. That's how I'll say that. So in call user func array, the first thing that you pass in is you pass in the function or method that you want to call. In this case, we're calling a method from a class. So we actually put this as an array, and our statement variable is the object that we created up here. So that's what we need to put here. And the method that we're going to call is bind param, of course. So this is just another way essentially of calling bind param, but we're doing it in call user func array. And then in here we can pass in values, and what that'll essentially do is it will take our format string and put it in first, and then any other elements that are in this values array, it's going to essentially go ahead and create those variables for us, and it's as if we were calling bind param and we knew how many variables we needed to pass in for binding our values. But in this case, it'll do it dynamically. So if we have one element in here, or one value that needs bound, it'll just bind 1. If we have 5, it'll bind all 5 and do it correctly. Okay. I know that's probably a little rough to get through, but as you start messing with this, you should kind of hopefully see how that works. All right. So one thing you'll notice here is when we do pass in values, we're actually running it through this method called ref values, and that's a method that we created down here called ref values. And the reason we do that is because as of PHP 5.3, the bind param requires that the values that you pass in are by reference, not direct values. Now, I'm not going to get too heavy into exactly what all that is, but suffice it to say, if you try and just put values in here directly, it won't work. It's going to tell you that it needs to be by reference. So what we do is we have this method that essentially takes our values array and it loops through and it makes them all references essentially and returns that array back, so that we can then, when we pass into bind param, all of those values are by reference. Okay, this and at the beginning is essentially what makes it by reference. So that's what that method is. Now, I know this method may or may not make complete sense, and it's kind of one of those things where, at least right now, it's probably not 100% necessary that you know exactly all the ins and outs of why that works. Just suffice it to say it does, and you need to do it. But just to kind of cover a little bit why we're calling that method when we pass that into bind param, it's because those values need to be by reference, and that's what that does. Right, so that is binding all of our parameters. So now we can actually execute this query, and then we're going to check just to see if it's successful or not based on how the number of affected rows. Essentially, if our query goes through, the number of affected rows is going to be, in this case, it'll be 1 because we're inserting 1. And if this query doesn't work, then this affected rows will actually be empty. So we can return true based off of that. Now, again, you could look at this part if you want to. I mean, again, this is one of those situations where this was written in like an hour and it hasn't really been tested a whole bunch. So there may be situations where there's something, this could return some sort of false positive, but for our purposes here, it works fine. So we're returning true based off of that, right? So if we go back down to then where we use this, you can see we're creating a post called abstraction test. Our post content is abstraction test content. If we come over here and we go to our database, well, we've got a bunch of these in here already, but you can see our ID that we're on is 16. So if we go to our page now and reload our page, you see we get our method returns 1, which is it's actually the number of rows affected, but we can use that to test for true. If we come back over here to objects, you can see that now we have a new field with our information in it. We only specified the post title and the post content. All right, so basically it works. You can see that it works there. So that is the insert method. Next, we'll go ahead and take a look at the update method, and this will be a little bit quicker because it's really almost identical. So you see that here we're doing our objects table again, just like we did for insert. We have our data array, and we're doing post title and post content. This time we're changing it from abstraction test to abstraction test update, and abstraction test content we're changing to abstraction test update content. Again, we're passing in our format for those fields, and what we're adding is our where clause and our where format. So when you update, you remember you always need to specify a where clause. Otherwise, it'll update all of your records in your database, and you don't want that. You only want it to update a specific record. So that's why we need to specify that where clause. Now, to make it so that you can update different records easily, we have to pass that information when we call this call this method. We also, since we're using binded parameters, and this is going to be a parameter that could be passed, for example, if you're using a content management system, this could be passed in a get or post. via a form or via URL, you still want to make sure and bind this parameter. Okay, so or you can do multiple actually where clauses or where items here. And we'll look at that. But in this case, what it is we're looking for an ID of 16, and 16 is obviously a number. So that's our where statement here, and this is our where format. Okay, so if we go up to the update method, I'm not gonna, in the interest of time, I'm not gonna go back over stuff we've already covered, because you're gonna notice a lot of this is really similar, but I will note the changes. Right, so in our update method, we have our table, we have our data, we have our format. Now we have our where array, and we have our where format. Okay, so again, we're checking the table and the data, we're connecting to the database, we are casting these to an array. Here we're building our format string like we did before. What's new is that we're actually doing the same thing to our where format. So our format and our where format are actually similar because they're both just arrays of strings that denote whether a field was a string or an integer or whatever else it may be. Right, so you'll notice that we're doing an implode just like we did on format. We're doing an implode on where format. Here we're doing the exact same string replace that we did up here. So we're formatting these exactly the same. The difference is that once we get done, we are appending the where format to the format. Okay, so what we end up with is if we echo the format, and I'm going to go ahead again and down here and comment this out. So if we echo the format, what we end up with is this format right here, SSD. The reason we need to do that is because ultimately when we do our query, we're going to do, when we do an update, we're going to do set, and we're going to set fields equal to values. Well, those values will all have placeholders. And then at the end, we're going to use a where clause where, and whatever we specify, in this case, our ID equals, and we're going to use a placeholder there. So we need to take the where format placeholder, the format for the where clause placeholder, we need to append to the end of this format. So when we pass into bind param, we have the format correct. Okay. Again, we'll look at this query. That'll hopefully make a little bit more sense. All right, so that's that. Here we are doing the exact same thing in terms of calling prep query and listing those what's returned into variables. The difference is we're passing an update, and if we come down here to prep query, when it equals update, we're changing it to, instead of just a list of a comma separated list of question marks, it's actually a comma separated list of field name equals question marks, because that's what the update SQL syntax requires. Okay, and we'll look at the query and that'll make a little more sense when we do that. All right, so here now we're formatting our where clause. So this is where we're actually formatting our where statement down here, because again, we're passing that in as an array so that we can have multiple where statements. So we can do where ID equals 16 and, you know, post title equals this, that, or the other. Now you probably wouldn't normally do that, but you may need to do different multiple where statements in order to update the correct item. So that's what we're doing here. So again, we're instantiating these here so that when we loop, we don't get PHP notices. We're going to count, because when we create our where statement, we want the first one, because we're actually saying where right here. We want the first item in this to just, we don't need it to have an and. But if this has multiple items, each one of those needs to be prepended with an and, because that's how the SQL syntax works. All right, so we're going to count, and we're going to basically skip adding that and for the first loop. So count equals 0. If the count is greater than 0, then we're going to add an and. Well, on the first loop, the count is going to equal 0, so it won't add this and. for every subsequent loop, it will. So then after that, when we build our actual where clause, we're doing field equals and this question mark here. So this will be ID equals our placeholder. We're also just grabbing our where values here. Again, we could do an array values to get this, but since we're already looping, we might as well just grab it here. So we're storing those values in an indexed array, and then we're upping our count so that this will then evaluate to false or true, and it will add those and statements that we need. All right, so that creates our where clause and our where values. Then again, we're doing array unshift, so we're prepending our format that we created up here onto the front of our values array. Now here we need to do an array merge because we need to get our where values onto the end of our values array as well. Just like we up here, we added the where format to the end of our format string, we also need to add the where values, which is 16, because our ID that we're looking to update is 16. That's what we specified down here. ID equals 16. We need to append that to the end of our values so that it can be bound to the correct placeholder. Right, so that's what this array merge does here. So here's our actual query that we're working with. I'm going to go ahead and just echo this so you can look at it. Should be a little easier to understand at that point. All right, so update objects table set post title equals question mark, because that's our placeholder. Post content equals question mark, placeholder. Where ID equals question mark, because that's a placeholder. Okay, just keep ignoring this one. That's because of my print R at the very bottom. That doesn't have anything to do with the query. All right, so we have all of our placeholders in here. You see we have 3 placeholders. Okay, so that is created right here by passing in our table name, which was specified, by passing in our placeholders, which we created here, just like we did in the insert method, and our where clause that we created up here. And so you saw again that was ID equals and our placeholder. Right, so that we run that through the MySQL prepare, and then we again call user func array, and we bind those values to those placeholders. Again, we have to run these through ref values so that they are by reference, and then we can actually execute this. All right, so we'll run over here and we'll execute this. This should update record 16. We should have it. Now it says test update content. Okay, and we could do any of these. So let's do 28. So this record 28 down here, abstraction test content. We refresh and that runs, and now we have abstraction test update content. Okay, so again, it works. All right, so that's insert and update. The next one is get results. Not much to say here. It really just calls this the query method directly. It just is essentially it's passing it into there. Now the reason that I have this as a separate method is because it may be that you want to add something to this, you know, whatever that may be as you develop your application. You can do that here, and you don't have to muddy up the query method. You can just this is essentially an alias, but you can go ahead and add stuff in here if you need to that is specific to getting results. Get row, it's really doing the same thing. The only difference is instead of returning all of the results, if there's multiple, it's just going to return the very first record. Okay, so that's the only difference really between these two. The last one we have here is delete. Now, if you look at other, you know, like EasySQL or WordPress, the WordPress database class, or a lot of them out there, you'll see that they don't have a delete method. I think the reason that is because when it comes to delete, it's a little bit, you don't want to have a method that when you pass information to it, that something goes wrong programmatically that could cause stuff to get deleted that you don't want deleted. So generally speaking, when you do deletes, querying the database as directly as possible is probably better, because it really, if you just run it through like the query method, it really comes down to how you formatted your SQL query. So there's nothing programmatically that can really go wrong there. But in this case, I wanted to show you a method if you wanted to do it, how to do it. I really recommend if you do, you keep it very, very simple. You notice I have it very simple and pretty strict here. So I would recommend doing that, because again, when it comes to delete, once it's gone, it's gone. So you don't want to have anything that you do programmatically in the code that's processing the query that could cause stuff to get deleted that you don't want deleted. Right, so we have two parameters for this method. We have our table and we have the ID of the record we want deleted. That's pretty simple. So we connect to the database as we have been. For our prepared statement, this one's really simple. So we're delete from our table where ID equals and our placeholder. You notice that we're not allowing you to specify the where clause, like how you want to search for it. This is only going to work if you know the ID of the record you want deleted. And we're doing that because, again, you want to keep this simple. This would be an example of keeping it simple enough to where it's really hard for anything programmatically to go wrong here. I mean, you either specify the correct ID or you don't. So when we bind the parameter, then you can see we're doing bind param like normal. The format is D because it is a number that we're expecting, and we're passing in ID that got passed here. Okay, and then we're executing that, and we're returning true if there's affected rows. Right, so if we come down here, I'm going to leave these in here for you to see the get results and get row, but I'm not going to cover them. Right, so we're going to delete from our objects table, we're going to delete record number 9. Okay, so if we go, we look, we have record number 9 here. If we come over here, we run that, come back, we see that record number 9 is deleted. Okay, so that is the delete method, pretty straightforward. The rest of these down here are the private functions private methods that we already covered that we used in the other methods. Right, so that's pretty hot and heavy, but I wanted to show you all of that to show you how you might go about abstracting out your database class. Well, the point of this is that now if you want to insert something, it's really pretty easy because you've written all of the heavy lifting code. You've done it with prepared statements. You don't have to worry about writing prepared statements anymore in terms of your insert and your update. So you can just specify the table, the data you want inserted from your form or whatever the case may be, and the format of each one of those items that you're inserting, or fields that you're inserting data into. And it's going to process it all for you. It's going to process it using prepared statements. So you can be, rest assured that it's going to be pretty safe. So that's the value of writing all that code and working through all that up front. Same with you if you want to update something, then it's really easy for you to update a record. You don't have to remember all of the prepared statement code and the where clauses and this, that, and the other. You just enter the information into the method when you call it appropriately, and it'll do all that for you. When it comes to select statements, I think we're all pretty used to every little different query is going to have a little bit different select statement. So in this case, all you really have to do is write the select statement for exactly what you want. You just really need to change the SQL query, and these two functions will return exactly what you need from that. So still, even though you have to write the SQL query, that's still pretty straightforward, and it's something that we're all, I think, pretty familiar with. And then delete, of course, if you want to delete something, it's pretty simple to delete that. You can, if it's from another table, you can change the table or whatever the case may be. So pretty straightforward in terms of how to use it. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is meant for training to teach you how to do this. I really recommend, if you're going to use a database class, that you use one of the ones that is out there being developed by a community. I'm going to cover one in the next video and show you how to use it. So you can use this, but use it at your own risk. It's really never been tested or anything like that. So all right, that's how to abstract your database class, make it easier for your higher layers of code to be able to query your database and do the things that you need to do database wise. You'll notice here that this is just a little bit less than 200 lines of code. Granted, there's probably more that you would want to do here, but it's still pretty straightforward, or it's not a ton of code in terms of getting it to work. So all right, that's how to do it. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I'll talk to you later.